The red sky above the Cathani homeworld looked like blood as Admiral Veltar stood on his command deck. His people were dying. For months, he had watched helplessly as the Vorthok swarm ate their way through space, destroying everything in their path. These weren't normal enemies. The Vorthok were like giant space bugs that could change their bodies to resist any weapon fired at them. Veltar's forearms shook as he watched his last battleships explode in the distance. The insect creatures had already eaten 17 different worlds. Each time the Cathini tried to fight back with their energy weapons, the Vorthok just grew thicker armor. It was like trying to kill a monster that got stronger every time you hit it. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Northern Fleet," reported his communication officer, her voice barely a whisper. The young Cathani female's large eyes were filled with tears. "The bioships are heading straight for the capital city." Through the viewing screen, Veltar could see the Vorthok vessels approaching. They didn't look like normal spaceships at all. Instead, they looked like massive living creatures with tentacles and claws. Their hulls pulsed like beating hearts, and strange green acid dripped from their weapons. When these bioships attacked a planet, they didn't just destroy it. They consumed everything: the buildings, the people, even the atmosphere itself. The Cathani were a peaceful species. For thousands of years, they had lived quietly, growing their crystal gardens and studying the stars. They had never hurt anyone. Their biggest weapons were mining lasers used to cut through asteroids, but now they faced an enemy that seemed to enjoy causing pain and death. "Send out the emergency beacon," Veltar ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. "Broadcast it on every frequency we know. Tell the galaxy that we're offering our most precious treasure, the quantum computing matrices that took us centuries to build. Anyone who can help us fight these monsters can have everything we own." The quantum matrices were incredibly valuable. They could calculate faster than entire star systems and were worth more than most planets. The Cathani had planned to use them to explore distant galaxies and maybe find other peaceful species like themselves. Now they were willing to give them away just to survive. The distress signal shot out through hyperspace, reaching thousands of different worlds in seconds. On most planets, the message was deleted immediately. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Vorthok. They had appeared 50 years ago from the dark space between galaxies, and no military force had ever stopped them. The smart species just ran away and hoped the swarm would pick a different direction. But in a small, forgotten corner of the galaxy, in a system that most star maps didn't even include, something heard the call for help. The system was called Sol, and according to the Galactic database, it was completely worthless. The planets there were listed as either gas giants, ice balls, or something much worse. A class 12, Deathworlds, were planets so dangerous that they shouldn't be able to support life at all. Class 12 was the worst rating possible. The computers said that any creature trying to live there would be killed by radiation, poisonous air, extreme weather, or the millions of deadly predators that would call such a nightmare place home. So when a voice answered, the Cathini distress call, speaking in broken galactic standard with a strange accent, nobody expected it to come from Sol System. "We hear you," the voice said simply. "Coordinates received. We're coming." The words were spoken calmly, like the speaker was talking about going to the store instead of flying across the galaxy to fight the most dangerous enemy anyone had ever seen. There was something in that voice, something that made Admiral Veltar's skin crawl, even though it was supposed to be helping them. The Cathini language experts tried to figure out what kind of species could survive on a Class 12 death world, but their computers had no records. Whatever these creatures were, they had never contacted the galactic community before. They were completely unknown, living in isolation on a planet that should have killed them long ago. But they were coming to help, and that was all that mattered now. The darkness of space suddenly exploded with light as a massive ship tore through the fabric of reality itself. Captain Jake Morrison felt his stomach drop as the Terran Fury completed its hyperspace jump, but he had gotten used to that feeling. Years ago, around him, his crew worked at their stations with the calm efficiency of people who had seen real combat. "Holy hell," whispered Commander Rita Hayes from her position at the tactical station. Her fingers danced across the controls as data flooded the screens. "Jake, you need to see this." Morrison walked over to look at the display, and even he had to admit he was impressed. 37 massive bioships floated in formation around the Cathini homeworld. Each one was easily twice the size of his dreadnought, and they looked nothing like the metal starships humans were used to. Instead, they appeared to be giant living creatures, with pulsing skin and tentacles that writhed through space. "They're bigger than what Command told us to expect," Hayes continued, zooming in on one of the alien vessels. "Look at this. Those aren't weapon ports. They're actual mouths with teeth." Jake cracked his knuckles loudly, a habit he had picked up during his years fighting in the Martian colonies. The sound echoed through the bridge, and he noticed the new alien guest they had picked up flinch at the noise. The Cathani liaison officer, some unpronounceable name that started with 3 clicks, had been nervous ever since coming aboard. "Open a channel to our new friends," Jake ordered, settling into his command chair. "Tell them to pull their ships back to a safe distance. They're about to see how humans deal with pest problems." The main screen flickered to life, showing the worried face of Admiral Veltar. The alien leader had 4 arms, large dark eyes, and skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. When the hologram focused on Jake's face, those big eyes went even wider. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said carefully, "we are grateful for your arrival, but I must ask, your species actually lives on a Class 12 death world?" Jake looked around at his crew and had to smile. Every single human on the bridge carried scars. Hayes had a burn mark across her left cheek from a plasma explosion. His weapons officer, Tony Clark, was missing 2 fingers from a training accident with live grenades. The navigation specialist, Amy Rodriguez, had metal implants where Martian raiders had tried to cave in her skull. "That's what your computers call Earth?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. He had never thought of his home planet as particularly dangerous, but then again, he was used to it. "The classification system rates worlds based on environmental hazards," the liaison officer explained in a trembling voice. "Radiation levels, atmospheric toxicity, geological instability, predator density, weather extremes. Class 12 means a planet should be completely uninhabitable." Tony Clark laughed from his station. "Hell, that just sounds like Tuesday, back home." Jake nodded in agreement. "Ambassador, let me explain something about humans. We didn't just survive our world, we took it over completely. We killed everything that tried to eat us, poisoned anything that got in our way, and turned the whole planet into our personal playground. The deadliest predator on Earth isn't some giant monster, it's us." The Cathani admiral's forearms began to shake. "But how is that possible? Our scientists say that Class 12 worlds produce only the most vicious, aggressive species. Creatures that know nothing but violence and destruction." "Now you're starting to understand," Jake said with a grin that showed all his teeth. The expression made Veltar take a step backward, even though he was just a hologram. Amy Rodriguez spun around in her chair. "Captain, we've got movement from the bug ships. They're starting to turn toward us." "Perfect timing," Jake said, standing up and walking toward the main screen. "Admiral Vilta, I want you to watch very carefully. Your people have been fighting these Vorthok things with energy weapons, right? Trying to burn through their armor." "Yes, but they adapt too quickly. Every weapon we use becomes useless after a few shots." Jake's smile got even wider. "That's because you've been thinking like civilized people. We're going to show you what happens when you think like predators." He turned to his weapons officer. "Tony, load the special ammunition. Let's introduce these space bugs to some good old-fashioned human creativity." "With pleasure, sir," Tony replied, his scarred hands already working at the controls. The Cathani liaison officer whispered something that the translator couldn't handle, but Jake was pretty sure it wasn't a prayer for victory. The underground tunnels beneath Kethda Moon were darker than anything Colonel Mike Davis had ever seen, and that was saying something. He had fought in the caves of Mars, the deep forests of Europa, and even the radioactive wastelands of what used to be Detroit. But this place felt different. The air tasted wrong, like metal and rotting meat mixed together. "Keep it quiet, people," Davis whispered into his helmet microphone. Behind him, 30 of Earth's finest soldiers crawled through the narrow passages. They had been digging for 3 straight days. Each Marine carried enough explosives to level a city block, but they moved as silently as ghosts. The Vorthok had taken over this moon 2 weeks ago, turning it into some kind of breeding ground for their bio. The aliens built their structures by growing them like plants, creating massive organic towers that pulsed with their own heartbeat. It was disgusting, but Davis had seen worse things back on Earth. "Reaper, Actual. This is Ghost Seva," came the voice of Staff Sergeant Amy Rodriguez through his earpiece. "We're in position under the main hive structure. These bugs really don't know how to watch their backs." Davis smiled in the darkness. The Cathani had tried to fight the Vorthok the same way they fought everything else, with honor, formations, and predictable tactics. They would line up their ships, fire their energy weapons, and hope for the best. It was the kind of warfare that looked good in history books, but got people killed in real life. Humans had learned to fight differently. On Earth, the species that survived weren't the strongest or the fastest. They were the stickiest, the most creative, and the most willing to do whatever it took to win. Davis and his Marines had spent years studying every piece of information they could find about the Vorthok, looking for weaknesses that no one else had thought to exploit. "All units, this is Reaper Actual," Davis spoke quietly into his comm. "Remember, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. Execute Operation Anthill in 30 seconds. The plan was simple, but brutal. While the Cathani had been shooting at the Vorthok's thick armor, the humans had noticed something interesting. The bug creatures used their own digestive acids to break down the materials they consumed. Those same acids were stored in pockets throughout their biostructures, ready to dissolve whatever the Vorthok wanted to eat next. Rodriguez had figured out how to turn that system against them. Her demolitions team had spent 3 days crawling through service tunnels, planting small explosive charges in exactly the right spots. They weren't trying to blow up the Vorthok buildings. They were trying to rupture the acid storage chambers and let the creature's own biology do the work. "Ghost 7, light them up," Davis ordered. The explosions weren't particularly loud. Rodriguez had used shaped charges designed to punch small holes rather than create big booms, but the effect was immediate and horrifying. Digestive acids that were supposed to break down captured prey instead began eating through the Vorthok's own structures from the inside. The screaming started almost immediately. The sound was unlike anything the Cathani had ever heard, a mixture of electronic screeching and organic agony that seemed to shake the very ground. The massive biotowers began to collapse as their own digestive systems turned against them, dissolving the support structures from within. "Jesus Christ," whispered Private Tony Clark, watching through his scope as Vorthok creatures poured out of their dying buildings. "They're literally being eaten alive by their own stomachs." Davis felt no sympathy. He had read the reports from the 17 worlds the Vorthok had consumed. Men, women, and children dissolved alive to feed these monsters. As far as he was concerned, they were getting exactly what they deserved. Within an hour, the moon was quiet again. The Vorthok biostructures had collapsed into puddles of acidic slime, taking their occupants with them. Not a single human soldier had been injured, and they had used less ammunition than a typical training exercise. Later, as Davis cleaned his rifle in the abandoned Cathini observation post, Admiral Veltar's hologram appeared beside him. The Alien leader stared in shock at the destruction visible through the windows. How did you know that would work? Veltar asked, his forearms trembling slightly. How did you discover their weakness? Davis looked up from his weapon maintenance. We didn't know it would work, he said simply. We just tried it to see what would happen. Before that, Rodriguez's team tested 17 different approaches. We tried poison gas, electromagnetic pulses, sonic weapons, biological agents, and about 10 other things I can't tell you about because they're classified. But how did you know which approach to try first? We didn't, Davis repeated. That's the point. On Earth, you don't get to know what's going to work. You try everything until something does. The creatures that spend too much time planning and analyzing are the ones that end up as someone else's dinner. He reassembled his rifle, with practiced movements. Your people fight like you've never had to worry about real predators. You think there are rules, honor codes, proper ways to conduct warfare. But we come from a world where everything is trying to kill you, and the only rule is survival. Veltar was quiet for a long moment. I think I'm beginning to understand why your planet is classified as uninhabitable. Davis shouldered his weapon and headed for the transport ship. Admiral, our planet isn't uninhabitable. It's just very good at teaching its children how to kill things that need killing. Deep in the darkest corner of space, something ancient and terrible began to stir. The Vorthok Queen Mind had been sleeping for 1,000 years, dreaming of the billions of creatures it had consumed across the galaxy. But now it was awake, and it was absolutely furious. The Queen Mind wasn't just one creature. It was a massive intelligence that connected every single Vorthok in existence. When one of them died, the Queen Mind felt it. When 3 entire swarm clusters had been wiped out by these strange new mammals. The psychic scream of rage had actually damaged nearby star systems. For 50 years, the Vorthok had swept across the galaxy like a plague. No species had ever figured out how to truly hurt them. Sure, they might destroy a few bioships here and there, but the swarm always adapted and came back stronger. The Queen Mind had grown comfortable, confident that nothing could challenge its children. These humans were different. They didn't fight like civilized beings. They used tricks, traps, and weapons that seemed designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. Worse, they were learning. Each battle taught them something new about Vorthok biology, and they used that knowledge to create even more horrible ways to kill. The Queen Mind sent out a call that reached every corner of its empire. Every bioship, every warrior drone, every breeding facility, everything was to converge on the Sol system immediately. These mammals would be crushed completely, and their homeworld would be consumed as an example to any other species that might think about resisting. General Tom Bradley stood in the command center of the Roosevelt, watching the tactical displays, with the calm expression of a man who had seen everything the universe could throw at him. Around him, his staff worked quietly at their stations, processing the flood of intelligence data coming in from deep space sensors. Sir, we've got a problem, announced Major Kate Wilson, his intelligence officer. She was young for her rank, but Bradley had learned to trust her judgment during the Martian Rebellion. The Vorthok aren't just sending a few more ships. They're sending everything they have. Bradley walked over to the main display screen. The image showed a 3-dimensional map of local space, with thousands of red dots moving toward Earth from every direction. Each dot represented a Vorthok bioship, and there were more of them than anyone had ever imagined possible. How many? Bradley asked quietly. Conservative estimate, 12,000 ships. Maybe more. They're pulling forces from conflicts all across the galaxy. Sir, this isn't just a battle fleet. This is their entire civilization coming to wipe us out. Around the command center, other officers stopped their work to stare at the display. Even the most experienced veterans looked nervous. Humanity had won some impressive victories, but they had never faced anything on this scale. Bradley studied the tactical situation for several minutes without speaking. Finally, He turned to his communications officer. Send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them to execute Protocol Omega. The bridge fell silent. Protocol Omega wasn't just a battle plan. It was humanity's ultimate weapon. Developed during the darkest days of World War III, when it looked like the human species might actually destroy itself. The weapons systems involved were so dangerous that most people didn't even know they existed. Sir, Wilson said carefully, Protocol Omega includes the planet killers and the biological weapons we developed for the Europa colonies. Are you sure about this? Bradley nodded grimly. The Vorthok want to see what happens when you threaten humanity's survival. Let's show them. Across the Sol system, 50 massive dreadnoughts that had been hiding in the asteroid belt suddenly powered up their engines. These weren't normal warships. They were flying arsenals, loaded with weapons that violated every treaty humanity had ever signed with itself. Planet-killer missiles that could crack worlds in half. Engineered viruses designed to target specific genetic sequences. Devices that could literally erase matter from existence. During humanity's own wars, these weapons had been considered too dangerous to use. But the Vorthok weren't human, so those restrictions didn't apply. General Wilson said, her voice shaking slightly. The Cathani are sending urgent messages. They're begging us to reconsider. They say our allied species are terrified of what we might do. Bradley watched the first wave of planet-killer missiles launch toward the approaching Vorthok fleet. In the distance, an entire Vorthok world simply ceased to exist as a reality bomb detonated in its core. Major, do you know why Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world? Bradley asked. Because of the environmental hazards, sir. The radiation, the weather, the predators. That's part of it, Bradley agreed. But the real reason is because we're the most dangerous thing on that planet. We didn't just survive in a world full of killers. We became the apex predator. And when an apex predator is threatened, it doesn't just fight back. It eliminates the threat completely. Another Vorthok world disappeared from the tactical display, followed by 2 more. The bioships that had seemed so terrifying just hours ago were being systematically destroyed by weapons their builders had never imagined possible. The aliens are afraid of us, Bradley asked. Good. Fear is what keeps species alive when they're smart enough to avoid making enemies they can't handle. Wilson looked out at the destruction visible through the command center's windows. Sir, what if they're right to be afraid? Bradley's expression didn't change. Major, the Vorthok made a simple mistake. They thought humans were just another prey species. Now they're learning the difference between being hunters and being human. The Queen Mind's psychic screams grew weaker with each passing hour as its children died in ways it had never experienced before. For the first time in its existence, the ancient intelligence began to understand what its victims had felt. It was learning what it meant to be afraid. The Galactic Council station floated in neutral space like a giant crystal flower. Its transparent walls designed to show that all species were equal under its roof. But today, equality felt like a joke. Admiral Jack Thompson walked through the corridors with his small human delegation, and every alien they passed either bowed respectfully or quickly moved out of the way. 6 months had passed since the last Vorthok bioship had been turned into cosmic dust. The galaxy was finally safe, but nobody seemed particularly happy about it. The same species that had begged for human help now whispered nervously whenever Thompson's people entered a room. The main council chamber was enormous, with seats arranged in a perfect circle to show that no species was more important than any other. Representatives from hundreds of different worlds sat in their designated spots, but Thompson noticed that the chairs nearest to the human section were conspicuously empty. The emergency session will now come to order, announced Council Prime Veltar, his forearms shaking slightly as he spoke. The Cathini leader had aged considerably over the past months, and Thompson suspected it wasn't just from stress about the war. Thompson stood up slowly, his movement causing a ripple of nervous energy throughout the chamber. He was a big man, even by human standards, with scars on his hands from his years serving in the Pacific Fleet back on Earth. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the vast room. "The Vorthok threat has been completely eliminated," he announced, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Every bioship destroyed, every breeding world sterilized, every trace of their genetic material removed from the galaxy. They're extinct." A collective shiver ran through the assembled aliens. The Vorthok had terrorized the galaxy for 50 years, consuming entire civilizations without mercy. Most species had assumed they would exist forever, like a natural disaster that couldn't be stopped. The idea that they could simply be erased from existence was both wonderful and terrifying. "We are grateful beyond words," Veltar said carefully, his large eyes never quite meeting Thompson's gaze. "But now, we must discuss the future. What are humanity's intentions regarding galactic governance?" Thompson almost smiled. "We don't want to rule anybody. We've got enough problems managing our own species. But we've decided to establish protection protocols for any civilization that requests our assistance." The chamber erupted in nervous chatter. Representatives whispered urgently to each other in dozens of different languages, their translators working overtime to keep up. Thompson waited patiently for them to quiet down. "What exactly do these protection protocols involve?" asked Ambassador Zethkol, the representative from the Rigel Confederation. His species looked like walking trees, but his voice carried the authority of someone used to asking tough questions. "Lieutenant Commander." Beth Parker stepped forward from her position behind Thompson's chair. She was smaller than the Admiral, but somehow seemed even more dangerous, like a knife hidden in silk. Her smile made several nearby aliens unconsciously lean away from her. "It's quite simple," Parker explained in a voice that could freeze helium. "Any species under human protection will be completely safe from external threats. We'll establish monitoring stations in your systems, provide defensive fleets, and ensure that aggressive neighbors think twice before causing problems." "And what do you want in return?" Zethkol pressed. "Nothing," Thompson said. "We're not charging rent for this service. But there are some basic requirements. Species under our protection don't get to start wars with each other. They don't get to commit genocide. And they definitely don't get to threaten Earth or our allies." Council Prime Veltar raised one of his four hands. "What if a species chooses not to accept human protection?" Parker's smile got colder. "Then they don't get it. We're not forcing anyone to accept our help. But I'd suggest choosing your enemies very carefully from now on. We'll be watching everything that happens in this galaxy through the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the chamber. Everyone could see the human fleet preparing to depart. Hundreds of ships hung in space like sleeping giants, their hulls scarred from the recent war. But Thompson knew what the aliens couldn't see. Thousands more ships were already heading for the outer rim, carrying colonists, military equipment, and weapons that made the Vorthok planet killers look like firecrackers. "You're staying," Veltar observed, and it wasn't a question. "We're expanding," Thompson corrected. "Humanity has learned that the best way to protect your friends is to make sure nobody else gets strong enough to threaten them. We'll be establishing colonies, bases, and monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. Think of us as the neighborhood watch, except we're armed with The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The galaxy had called for help when the Vorthok threatened to consume everything. Humanity had answered that call with violence so overwhelming that it had shocked even their allies. Now they were making it clear that they weren't going anywhere. Ambassador Zethkol spoke for everyone when he asked, "What have we done?" Thompson finally allowed himself to smile. "You asked the apex predators for help? Now you get to live with the consequences. But don't worry, as long as everyone plays nice, you'll never have to see what we're really capable of." Outside the viewport, The last of the human colony ships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying humanity's promise to every corner of the galaxy. The age of peaceful coexistence was over. The age of human protection had begun, and everyone knew that protection was just another word for control when it came from a species that had turned warfare into an art form.